afternoon, panelists. We are Eclipse Consulting.
And today, we, the real Eclipse Consulting, are very excited to share with you our strategy on how HSBC can move from reactive to preventive and proactive in terms of their AI fraud detection strategies in order to really mitigate threats just like these.
Today, you asked us how banks can bring about this more agile and predictive approach in the fight against fraud, especially as things become more AI-driven within the financial ecosystem. And today, we are so excited to present our strategy, the HSBC Loop. But before I get ahead of myself, let's situate ourselves in what's happening today. We see that AI has been a double-edged sword, allowing banks to become more operationally efficient, providing personalized services, but also securing their operations. However, we see that fraudsters have access now to the same technology and are able to do more and more. With this, they've developed more advanced technologies, from deepfakes to synthetic identities, that pose an emerging threat to banks, risking not only financial losses, possibly in the millions, but also incalculable reputational damages if one piece of the loop were to fall undone. That is why, with HSBC's scale processing over 1,000 transactions per second, we want to ensure that there are scalable technologies that allows us to fight in this arms race. With every action that you do, someone out there is scheming and trying to take advantage of a vulnerable part of your system. That is why, with the right technologies, we seek to protect not just your system, but your customers and your employees. That is what we are trying to do with our problem statement, and our strategy has 3 key goals in mind: being holistic, being predictive, and balancing customer security with convenience. So I'll pass it on to my colleague Tiff for the analysis.
So the challenge is very clear, but where exactly do we start? So we believe it's in these 3 building blocks. First is link. How can HSBC move beyond siloed systems and defenses to enhance fraud detection? Second is orchestrate. How do we collaborate without sacrificing data privacy and compliance rules? And finally, operate. What model can adapt fast enough so that we can outpace these emerging fraud trends? So let's go through them one by one. When we look at the financial crime landscape today, we see that it's a never-ending battle. And at the same time, the arms race is really accelerating very fast. But banks' legacy models really can't keep pace with the pace that it's going at right now. When we look at HSBC, we see that it sits right at the center of the problem. But it cannot compete alone. And indeed, it doesn't. When we look at the financial ecosystem, we see other industry peers who are faced with the same problem, but at the same time are employing similar methods as us in terms of behavioral biometrics in order to combat these types of financial crimes. At the same time, we are seeing regulatory bodies and authorities who are also invested in combating the financial crimes that are facing us today. And finally, we even see opportunities among new and adjacent players, such as fintechs, who can provide us with richer and upstream fraud signals eventually down the line. So the message for us really is clear. Linking with industry players and regulatory bodies is really the way forward. But given the nature of banks and the strict regulations that we are surrounded with, it's not as straightforward as it seems. So what this tells us is that successful collaboration really relies in 3 criteria. First is data quality and breadth. We want to have extensive data, but at the same time, quality data that will allow us to come up with productive outputs. Second, data privacy and compliance. We are dealing with sensitive data, but we want to ensure that we are operating with ethical processes all throughout. And finally, accuracy and historical biases. We want to ensure that all of the outputs, or at least most of the outputs we come up with, are consistent and accurate. So this tells us 3 things. First, we want to expand data sharing with peers and regulatory bodies. Second, ensure that privacy is preserved all throughout the process. And finally, we operate with models that are iterative and learning as we go. So now when we look at the landscape today, we see that there are many models around us. We see single bank anomaly detection tools, and we even see centralized data pooling. But all of these have their own gaps. First is they can be too narrow, they can be too risky, or even too siloed. Now, federated learning is this exciting new technology, a decentralized machine learning model that trumps all the aforementioned models above in its ability to balance data sharing and collaboration with data privacy. Now, here are the benefits of federated learning. First, it allows broader data coverage that allows sharing of data among multiple banks. Second, it has adaptive intelligence that continuously learns and adapts with emerging trends. And finally, it allows for privacy preservation and compliance since raw data doesn't really leave the bank in itself. So we have talked you through our way forward. Now, Elena here will talk you through our strategy.
Judges, I am so excited to present to you our HSBC Loop strategy, looping in the right technologies, our employees, and our customers. Let's first go through the first component, or the federated learning model that we will be employing to combat fraud prevention with collective banks. So, the purpose of this model is so that banks can glean rich insights on fraud detection without risking data privacy. And let's first talk about who we're involving. We want to go to the Hong Kong Association of Banks, or major retailer banks that will help us collate data and also assess the model's feasibility and accuracy. With this, because of our shared goal to prevent fraud in these certain markets, we are able to work together and achieve these outcomes. Next, we have the Hong Kong Monetary Authority, who will be our compliance and regulatory partner, ensuring that the first rollout of this federated learning model is smooth and secure. That brings us to how we're actually ensuring that the data is passed securely. The way that the model works is that, for example, HSBC's data points can show that there are fraud patterns A and B. However, there can be an emerging fraud pattern, C, namely, and we see that other banks might have the right data needed to close the loop in our understanding of how to detect these types of fraud. That is why we are able, through the aggregated model, to detect these things early on and proactively, using only the results of each other's federated learning models, thus ensuring complete data privacy. With this, we're able not only to combat the fraud of yesterday, but the cases as well of tomorrow. But with all of this new information and patterns coming into our system, we want to ensure that all of the data we're using is non-hallucinatory and actually follows and checks the right things, and we're flagging the right things. That is why we're introducing a generative adversarial model. This is somewhat of a push and pull, developing compliant synthetic fraud data to be able to stress test our models and ensure the patterns that we're using and identifying are actually in line with what's happening in our world today. Then, with this, we're able to cover the different edge cases and also reduce model overfitting, training not just on our own data, but on other data types as well. Then, all of this taken together with the introduction of the FL and GAN parts to our fraud detection engine, we are able to provide more holistic and nuanced account and transaction risk scores. What this means is that in different features with our customers, from fraud, OTPs to SMS notifications, we're able to be more strategic and purposeful with where we roll them out. So I'll pass it on to Tiff again for our analysis.
So we have developed the loop, but the story doesn't end just yet. Now it's time to bring the humans in the loop, starting with our employees. So we know that our employees are really at the front line of our operations. But when we look at the landscape now, we see that new and more sophisticated types of risks are really confronting them. It's particularly deepfakes. And deepfakes are prevalent for a lot of reasons. But I'd like to focus on two things. First is low public awareness. People might be aware of what deepfakes are, but they're not really aware of how sophisticated deepfakes have already become today. Second, we have limited human ability to distinguish real from deepfake. While we think we can distinguish, reports have consistently shown that our accuracy to do so doesn't really fall too far from a random guess. So what this tells us is that deepfake is a multifaceted problem. Employee education is a crucial first step, but it cannot be the core and only a component of our holistic approach. Now, when we look at the industry, we see that deepfake detection tools are really available in the market. And now the question is just, do we build and develop this in-house, or do we outsource it to a third-party vendor? Now, we have analyzed these two options across 3 dimensions. First is the time to deploy. Second is the expertise to do so. And finally, the associated costs. We know that outsourcing it to a third-party vendor can be a bit more expensive, but in terms of the deployment time and at the same time the expertise with the databases and the detection tools themselves, we believe that outsourcing it to a third-party vendor is the best way forward. We have included here a sample third-party vendor that you can tap into, particularly Reality Defender. Reality Defender really has years of experience, and at the same time, they do have notable partnerships with the likes of Zoom and Microsoft Teams, which can allow for better integration into our workflows later down the line. Now, my teammate Pat here will talk you through how this actually translates to our actual workflows.
Now, panelists, I'm sure you're all familiar that cybersecurity trainings are protocol at this point for large corporations like HSBC. But emerging trends such as deepfake really call for extensive training using videos and gamified exercises, really teaching our employees how to identify what's real from what's not, and also using tools such as Reality Defender for deepfake detection. So what does this now look like? Well, if in the past, an employee would simply hop onto Zoom thinking that they were talking to one of their higher-ups, but they didn't even know that it's actually a deepfake impersonation seeking to steal their money. Now with Reality Defender, with one simple click, it immediately scans the person you're talking to, easily giving them accurate and early deepfake detection and really strengthening the internal systems of HSBC. So yes.
A quick question on the defender. Have you done any consideration to who holds the risk if they get it wrong? So if they identify someone who's fake but they're not really, or vice versa, is it HSBC that wears the cost of that or the third party?
So this tool really is just to aid the person identify if someone is real or not. But then it's always possible to verify with the person that they're talking to, maybe with a text message or a separate call that, hey, I'm on this call with you, but then Reality Defender has told me that I'm talking to a deepfake. Can I verify if this is actually you? So this isn't necessarily a risk that, yes, thank you. So moving on. What this brings now is when we're equipping our employees with the right knowledge and high-level tools such as Reality Defender, we're really protecting ourselves and making ourselves resilient against deepfakes.
So we have talked about our employees, but there's another key stakeholder that we need to engage, particularly our customers. When we look at the banking customer today, we see that they're expecting more and more from us. Customers want convenience, but at the same time, they look into banks for security. But I'd like you to focus here at the bottom. Customers today also value having that choice in the security measures that are offered to them. What this means is a customer can be more conservative and would therefore want extra layers of security, but some customers might prioritize convenience and would therefore let go of these options. So the challenge for HSBC is not really about choosing between convenience, security, or providing that option of choice. And rather, it's really about finding that right balance of meeting the consumer where they are, while also not sacrificing on the convenience that they are looking for. So now there's a whole conversation around customer education, but reports have consistently shown that existing initiatives such as a two-factor authentication or these frontline security measures that we have are really a frontline defense when it comes to these types of security. But when we look at the industry, as you can see here on the left, there are other opportunities and other security measures that are available and therefore we can tap. So what we propose is for you to add these as supplementary features that the customer can either choose to say yes or no to, such as a multi-factor authentication or a bound device. What this allows us to do are two things. First, we do not inconvenience customers who might want to prioritize convenience, but at the same time, we're allowing this option for customers who might want an extra layer of security.
Now, how do we bring... Yes.
When you frame that question between customer wants A or B, what's your thinking in that? Do you think somebody's going to be paying a higher fee for getting a higher degree of security versus lower? Or do you think that's more the customer's threat protection? Because the moment the customer loses money, they will still come to the bank and say that the infrastructure, which is rightfully so, right? Because the infrastructure has not been up to scratch. So how do you think about that? Because you've put a very interesting lens on A or B, but I couldn't quite understand where you're thinking about that.
We believe it's a matter of threat protection. some customers might want that extra layer. They want to feel more secure, especially that now everything's online, everything's connected, and would therefore want that extra layer of security. But other customers might want that convenience. For example, an OTP can inconvenience me, but another customer might want that OTP because they feel that, oh, I'm more secure with that available option. And therefore, we want to provide these types of security measures, extra security measures, so that customers can really have that autonomy to choose as to what security measures they have.
As a customer, would you choose them?
We will talk you through about it in our strategy later.
Sorry, it was not meant to ask the question.
No problem. So moving on to the strategy, how do we now bring our customers back into this fraud prevention loop? Well, we know that most of our clients who usually fall into fraud schemes are actually more on the younger and educated demographic. That's why we want to use particularly social media and email newsletters as our main channel to really educate them and inform them that, hey, we actually have these new security features that you might want to use. And at the same time, we want to reinforce these with nudges through text messages and also notifications. And now once they are brought into the HSBC mobile banking app, they're now introduced to an interactive tutorial where they are taught step by step how to actually find these security features and see how easy it is to set these up with just some simple clicks. And now they are introduced to our optional security features, the multi-factor authentication, which really uses at least three different authentication steps rather than the usual two, and also bound devices, which allows them to authorize a particular device that they use to make transactions. So what does this now bring for our customers? It brings them better value because it helps them feel more confident and more secure when banking with HSBC. Now, with the urgency of our problem, what we really want to do is to finish partnership development by end of 2025, and our other must-win battle is really being able to develop our systems, integrating FL and GAN into our fraud engine detection systems, and also piloting them in Hong Kong by 2026. And with the success of this, eventually roll them out to other geographies. All of this supported by a team of strong FL experts. And now I'll pass the mic to Kyla for risk and mitigation.
Now, especially in banking and AI as a whole, there's a lot of risks that we must consider. Now, the biggest one, and I want to direct your attention to risk number one, is really the sophisticated AI frauds that have been developing and are currently bypassing these existing systems that we have. But with the strategy that we have, we're not only more adaptive, we're also more proactive and predictive with the type of risks that we may face. Not only then are we addressing the issue, but we're actually further reducing and mitigating this problem. But especially when we execute our strategy, there's also a lot of considerations that we must have. Firstly, the data and security privacy that we must follow, and at the same time, the transparency demands of AI. But what we see is through the FL, we're actually able to incorporate additional layers of security, particularly through the secure multi-party computation and differential privacy. But at the same time, we're also really holding ourselves to the standard that we currently have. That means that through our different processes, we really want to ensure proper compliance, similar to what we already do. That means that we're also having auditability and explainability reports through LIME and SHAP. Now, we've talked you through the three parts of our strategy: technology, employees, and customers. But how exactly do we measure success through them? Well, firstly, and most importantly for the technology, we want to make sure that it's not only accurate, but also reliable. But with banks like HSBC, there also has to be the timeliness aspect of these risk mitigations. So that's why we also want to measure the latency and processing time that it has. Now, for the employees, we want to measure the effectivity of our strategy, not just through the different internal frauds that we are reducing, but also through the completion rates and the compliance that they will be following. Lastly, and most importantly, we really want to measure our customer satisfaction. At the end of the day, it is through their trust in us that we're able to make money and also do these types of initiatives. So what we see here is there's also a lot of benefit that comes to it. We see that we're able to reduce our fraud loss, compliance reduction, and after that, we're also able to enhance and further grow our customer satisfaction. This means that we get better brand reputation, better NPL, and better cost risk while mitigating all of these strategies. And at the same time, we see a lot of benefit growing, especially with the cost savings and revenue generation that we are able to forecast. We see that in particular, the cost saving aspect, especially because we're able to further build our reputation is really the biggest driver of these benefits. At the same time, we also see higher potential revenue, especially as customers trust us more and are willing to deposit more money into their accounts. But of course, this also requires significant investment, particularly through these three aspects: the federated learning infrastructure, the GAN model, as well as the deepfake detection subscription. But all of it amounts around $331 million, but it's still very much worthwhile considering the benefit and upside that we found, resulting in an ROI of around 8.3x.
Your presentation time is up. We will now move forward to the Q&A session. Q&A session starts now.
I got the first question. I would like to clarify that for the FL initiative that you're assuming that the Hong Kong Association of Bank is the key stakeholders, right? They will manipulate everything and own the model as well. Am I correct?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
so HSBC is just one of the participants within that.
Yes.
Yeah. So how you assume the business model and the operation for this whole thing? Yeah. For example, if I'm HSBC, I contribute a lot, like the data, whatever. But how about a small banks? They just contribute a little. So how that you assume the business to be running in the future?
Especially with this, our first target to the people that we will contact, especially, is the similar banks in our size. So what we really want to do is ensure that there's a lot of data that we can gather, and at the same time really be able to understand more of the different types of frauds. And what we see is that these bigger banks are also the most prone to these frauds, which is why we want to further then double down on these larger sized banks. In the future, we do see high potential for scaling towards these smaller banks, but as of right now and as of piloting, we really want to prioritize these sorts of banks.
Actually, my question is how you assume that HKAB is going to operate this one? Yeah, because you are just a participant as HSBC.
As HSBC is currently part of the co-chair of the HKAB, we also want to closely work with HKMA, who already have initiatives, especially when it comes to reduction and fraud, particularly through the use of AI. So we see that by working together with them, and also by bringing in together our fellow banks, we can then further...
How you assume that they have the operation team to work on that? As an association, how do they operate this?
So just to clarify, the FL model will be operated with Google Cloud and Swift, and HKMA will be that regulatory body to oversee this whole partnership that we have as HSBC and the other banks that we are bringing in this model.
Okay, Google. Okay.
No, you go ahead.
Oh, I really like the fact that you've linked the customer as well. So it's quite balanced in your presentation. Do you have any analysis on how customers feel about the extra authentication steps? And how have you come up with the ones that you've proposed?
So we do understand that certain customers really value convenience. They don't want to be hassled with the security measures that we are implementing. But that is the reason why when we look at our strategy here, we are proposing supplementary features. So these are being implemented as an optional add-on, but at the baseline, we are continuing the existing initiatives you have under HSBC Safeguard.
For the employee part, you talk about the training. What role or what kind of employee do they need to receive this training, and how many people, how many staff they need to receive this training? Apart from this, for your cost model, do you take into account for the training cost for the staff?
So I can answer the first question. Ideally, we believe that all employees inside the company must undergo this kind of training, because based on research, it's not just the lower employees that are vulnerable, even up to the C-level directors and all of the higher ups may also be prone to these deepfake variants. And so it's really important to have everyone in the organization aware of these tactics.
And what is the KPI for this staff? If they don't pass, do they get the salary deduction? Or if they pass, do they have the bonus?
Not necessarily, but they can undergo more training just so that they're more well-equipped to face these kinds of threats.
Now, to answer your second question when it comes to cost, if we can go to the breakdown further in the appendix, what we see is that we're actually properly allocating enough budget to actually have this module within HSBC's system. At the same time, we also foresee that there's going to be a lot of updates, especially as these models develop, especially with the new types of AI fraud here. So if you see here in particular, we're allocating significant budget into this development because it's a big important part for our employees.
But how about the time cost? Let's say if 1 hour, yeah. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
This is the end of your presentation. Thank you, Eclipse Consulting.
Thank you. Thank you. Good.